Well, thank you all for joining. Welcome to the NAPB Breeding for Controlled Environment Agriculture webinar. My name is Liana and I'm facilitating today's discussion on behalf of the NAPB Commercial Breeders Committee. So this topic came up in discussions among our group as a fascinating breeding space that falls at the intersection of agricultural technology, consumer preference, resource optimization, and breeding. And today we have a panel of 3 experts in breeding for controlled environment ag. And so I want to get right into the discussion. First, I'll just introduce our 3 panelists. All right, so we have Zeb Rehrig, who's the protected sweet pepper breeder with Bayer Crop Science. We have Robert Swinkels, the senior breeder for cucumbers at BASF, and Bert Meulenbroek, manager of breeding with Fresh Forward. So thank you all for joining us. And each of them are going to give a brief background on their role and perspective on our topic. And for those of you in the audience, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat, indicate which speaker you'd like to address it to, and we will pull those into our panel discussion in the second portion of the webinar. So we'll go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead, Seb.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for people in other parts of the world. And so a little bit about myself. I am the product development breeder for Bayer, working specifically on sweet peppers. So that would be blocky or May-pointed types of peppers that are grown under protected environments, which would be glass house, net house, and any type of cover that you would have over the crop. The main markets for me would be in Mexico and in Canada. So and I've been with the company about now about 4 years, and I'm based out in Woodland, California. So when we think about blocky peppers, there's a lot of different types. There's a lot of different colors, as you may know. We have the green, red, yellow, orange pepper colors. And then we have different types, blocky and half-longs. Half-longs are ones that are more elongated versus the blocky is more of a 3x3 inch pepper. And then we have crop durations. And the crop durations often tie really closely with this segment. So most times open fields crops have a short crop duration. And then as you get more into higher technology from low to mid, you get kind of an increasing crop duration time point. And I guess the point of all these different segment colors, material class, and crop durations is that as a breeder, you cannot really focus on just one of these particular segments or colors. You really cannot have silos in the breeding process, and because that can create genetic bottlenecks. And we know that sweet pepper in general is pretty low in diversity as it is. So if you narrow yourself in a corner with only using specific gene pools, then it makes it difficult to incorporate new novel disease resistance or innovative traits later on. So if you hit the next button on the slide, we're basically eliminating those silos and trying to breed across different germplasms for the different agronomies and types. So sweet pepper, not all pepper control environment is really controlled, and they're not all the same. We have some examples of Mexico being low tech with just basically it's an open field. It's open field crop, but with a net over the top. The very low technology of growing. Then in other parts of the world, like in Spain, they have kind of what we call mid-tech, and so the little bit more sophistication in how they prune, train the plants. And then in the other extreme, we have the high tech, which is a glass house environment, generally heated, plants are usually grown in rock wool, so they're not planted directly in the ground. And again, like I said earlier, these are a longer duration crop. And then last, I guess I should also point out that we do have vertical farming. I don't specifically breed for those particular type, but that is a kind of an emerging market of growing in like a container or high density floor space. Next slide. So it's just some general challenges in breeding for a controlled environment. So as I mentioned, so even though we call them controlled, there are still some environmental components to take into consideration. My little graph there on the right kind of shows some different things to keep in mind, such as plant density, cultural practices of a 2-stem versus 3-stem, hydroponic versus being directly in the ground, how the grower can re-trellis the plants, and then of course the covering. And all of these can be influenceable by light, temperature, humidity, and then you still have your biotic and abiotic stresses that you would have in open field. Really big challenge is high trialing cost. It's really expensive to put plants into a greenhouse. The energy cost. There's also the labor constraints, which you're training the plants and then pruning them, harvesting them on a weekly basis, and for a year long sometimes. There's a high demand for high quality in your product. So if I were a breeder and said, hey, to a grower, can I trial this variety and it doesn't look very good, then it really is an eyesore for the company and the relationship with the grower. So we do want to put out the best products in trialing as we can as we get into more advanced trialing stages. Phytosanitary needs, I mean, I think a lot of people have heard of the Cobra rugose, brown rugose virus that it affected the tomatoes, and that really put a strict requirements in what goes into the greenhouse, whether that be the seeds, the people, and the plants. So there's a lot of regulations over that, and so it's important to maintain good, clean conditions. And I think that standardized check varieties is always difficult. The seeds, the plants are really difficult to obtain. They're often really expensive, and then there's a lot of innovation opportunities that I think are really specific to controlled environment versus open field. I think we can have a lot more mechanization that can happen in a controlled environment versus open field. That's because the conditions are cleaner, and so I think there's a good opportunity there. So it pass on to the next slide, and I think that wraps my slides. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Zeb. All right, next, Robert.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Robert Swinkels, and I'm the breeder for cucumber high tech at BASF vegetable seeds. Yeah. Yeah, something very short about the company I work for, BASF vegetable seeds. Originally, we were it's a family company called Nunnums. I think most of the people know it. We have many breeding stations, R&D centers all over the world. The main one is in the Netherlands, where I'm also based and work from. And I work specifically for high tech, and that's North Europe and Canada, Canada country. Yeah, next slide. So a little bit about my background. 2000, I graduated from the University of Applied Sciences, bachelor. In 2000, I started my career at Nunnums. So I started as assistant. I worked in markets for Spain, Mexico, it's more mid-tech, and also high-tech in North Europe, Finland, Canada. Over the years, I did several courses, company, University of Wageningen, and I grew up with the development of market tools and applications. 25 years ago, it was a little bit of a different league, and I was lucky that I could grow with all these nice technologies. 2013 started as breeder, and since 2 years I'm specifically working on high-tech cucumber, and that's the long and the mini, as you can see there in the pictures. Yeah, next slide. High-tech indoor glasshouse facilities where you can steer precisely on heating, water, nutritions, CO2, artificial lights. Cucumbers are grown in rock wool, and on a yearly base, let's say a Dutch grower can get to 250 to 300 pieces per square meter over several crops. And that's summarized per square meter, let's say around 100 kilos. So that's really a lot. If you look into the market from February to November, the production is coming from the north of Europe, because in the south there are hardly cucumber crops. And in the winter times, the cucumbers come being produced in the south of Europe. And that's basically the same thing as in Mexico versus Canada, more or less. Now, what are our breeding goals? For cucumber, most important, the yield, food quality, resistances to viruses, diseases. And nowadays, what's really getting more important is, for example, plant architecture to reduce the labor, because the labor is getting really problematic the last couple of years. And we see that growers tend to choose for varieties which require less labor. So what are the trends? Resistances, like I said, labor, and what we see is that high wire growing system, it's together with lights to make sure that you can make a year-round production. That's really the trend that we see growing again after a couple of hard years with the energy crisis that we had recently. Okay, I think that's about it. I think this is my last slide.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Go ahead, Bert.
Yeah. Okay, yes. My name is Bert Meulenbroek. I am manager breeding at Fresh Forward ever since the company was founded in 2005. Before that, I was working also in strawberry and in apple at the Weur in Wageningen. I started my career in apple and strawberry in 1989. And the Fresh Forward has been created as a kind of a new program that came out of the Weur, just to focus only on strawberry initially. And there are two shareholders. One is Vergaria Holland, which at the moment consists out of 4 strawberry plant nurseries. And also the Wageningen University is still shareholder. Right now we have also incorporated the apple breeding program since 2019. So that's came back to me again. Fresh Forward is working on the marketing, not only on the breeding, but also on the marketing of strawberry and apple varieties, concept creation, and IP management, which means plant breeding rights, trade names, production, trading, and multiplication licenses, and that kind of stuff. A lot of contracts. The next slide, please. Yeah. So just to give you an idea about the breeding program, both breeding programs are going along for quite a while. Strawberries actually started in 1943 and the apples in 1948. And I left out the older varieties, just to focus on a few of the latest varieties that we have released from mid to North Europe in strawberries. That's El Santa, Sonata, Opera, Palando, Rumba, Alejo, and Twist and Verdi. And in South Europe, the last couple of years, Kalinda, Fandango, and Ballada. And with the apples, we are in Elsta, Santana, Welland, Freya, Magic Star, and Bloss. Well, the breeding program has developed from outdoor both to also, especially in strawberry, a lot indoors. When I initially started with strawberry, for example, we did only 5,000 seedlings annually, and now it's up to 140,000 some years. And that's only because we are now working in different programs at different locations and with including molecular breeding as well. The breeding program for both apple and strawberry is focused on taste, texture, crispiness, and looks. Some things more for apple, other things more for strawberry. Storability, shelf life, resistances, picking times, and resilient varieties as well. Next slide, please. Here is an overview of the locations where we are. So you can see that we are both in the open field, Randwijk, Stevensbeek. Randwijk specifically for apples. Stevensbeek is for strawberry, which is in the middle. And Heers, which is in Belgium. It's also for strawberry, which is partly outdoor and partly covered by plastic tunnels. And then our main location is Hussen, where we are located with a facility of 4 hectares of greenhouse, where we do certain parts of the strawberry breeding program. And we also own a farm in Spain, where we also have tunnels. So that's semi-controlled, the way we are working with. So that's where I want to stop.
Great, thank you. All right, as I mentioned earlier, go ahead and submit questions into the chat if you have any. But to get the discussion started, I want to start a bit with consumer preference. So each of these crops have highly specified breeding targets based on consumer acceptance in the market. Is that consumer preference or the ability to produce really high quality, very specific types driving the tendency towards controlled environments for these crops? Or is it being driven more by other aspects, farmers' ability to adopt technology, efficiencies, or other things, energy costs or climate conditions, pest control? Bert, with strawberries, what is that shift, or what is the reasoning behind that you're seeing?
Well, I would say that for strawberry, it's mainly the technology change that people have adapted it rather than that quality in general. Quality is important for in greenhouse conditions. You can get better quality in general, and it's also better paid. So that's a good motivation for growers to change into that direction. You get quicker your investment back, and also you have more sure that you get what you want. Also, you increase your production time. Outdoor, you're much more live by the elements. Production time is very often shortened. And in the greenhouse, you have possibilities to start earlier and continue longer, which has a couple of effects. One is that there aren't that many peaks anymore in production and also on the market. And also, you get a higher price for your product.
Zeb, you're also looking at across different scales or management types. Is that similar for peppers?
Yeah, I think that it is a combination of both. I mean, the consumer driving the need for higher quality, as well as the growers are finding that it's just easier to grow in controlled environments in some ways. But if you look at Mexico pepper production, and 20 years ago, most of it was open field, and now it's kind of flip-flopped. Most of it's under some sort of protective cover, and that's driven a little bit by the consumers. There's a higher demand for better quality, but at the same time, the grower doesn't get a whole lot of price difference between the qualities that they produce, and in the terminals in importing into the U.S. The U.S. is the main consumer. You don't see a huge price difference in between first class fruit and a second class fruit, but there is a difference. So there's some of that going on, and then but But then, the grower management costs, I mean, is really a key point in shifting over to protected environments. In Mexico specifically, they were struggling with pepper weevils in the open field environment, and they still do even in the protected environment. But under the protected environment, they have a little bit better control for that pest, as well as a few other pests that you don't really get in a controlled environment. So, growers I think are pretty smart. They're doing a business, and they know that these are their input costs and this is the output cost. And if it doesn't make sense to go in a controlled environment, meaning if the costs are too expensive, then they're going to do an open field. And the same is true the other way.
So can we talk a bit more about the controlled environments? What is controlled environments, and how do you breed for those targets? In some cases, maybe are the targets very complex? And how do you define that target environment? There's a question here about, are there any differences in lights for each of the crops? Are the farmers tailoring their conditions to the genetics in hand, or are they using more standard environmental controls? It feels like in the case of this controlled environment agriculture, there's a lot of levers that you can use, but how much is that really playing into how you're doing the breeding for those conditions?
Yeah, I can say maybe something about it. In general, it's my impression that in many cases, growers start off with a certain situation where there are certain varieties, especially in strawberry, available. There is not such a quick turnover in varieties, which is an advantage for the growers. A lot of growing systems that are actually right now available in strawberry have developed with one variety called El Santa. And that has set a lot of kind of conditions for how people want to grow strawberries. And for us as a breeder now, it's sometimes difficult to make a new variety, create a new variety, which doesn't work exactly under the same conditions, because growers are not always see that they have to change something in their conditions to be able to get the most out of the new varieties. And that's why it's sometimes more difficult, I think, in controlled environmental agriculture to introduce a new variety. A new variety, you also have not only the fact that it's new, but they also have to learn again how to grow it. It might be small differences, but they can be crucial.
Yeah.
Looking like, yeah.
Maybe I can say something about lights. We had an energy crisis a couple of years ago in Europe, which affected the cucumbers tremendously, especially the lighted crops, because it was just too expensive to grow cucumbers. And over the last year, we saw that the majority of the growers, they changed their HPS lights to LED lights, and at least that's the situation in North Europe, in Holland basically. And they changed because of subsidies from the government, which made it very attractive to install the LED lights. So, but we see quite a big change of behavior of response to the varieties due to the LED lights, because in general it's a different way of growing, and the evaporation in the crop under LED lights is different. So we see quite a different response of the genetics under HPS lights compared to the LED lights, and that makes it quite challenging at the moment.
So are you tailoring your breeding program to have targets in each of these different types of management conditions, or are you kind of looking for a specific environment that maybe you have your system for, and then you kind of move out from there?
Yeah, well, we are with our greenhouses where we have our breeding and screening programs. We are in the you need to be in your market because you need to be in the environment more or less. you might think that greenhouses you can control everything, but it's not that simple. External climate conditions can still influence mainly the light levels or the temperature levels inside the greenhouse. So it cannot be completely controlled. So you need to be with your program in the market, let's say. And we have internal facilities, of course, where we grow, let's say, an average climate, because it's impossible to grow. If you have a couple of plants per genotype in your greenhouse, you cannot make the climate specific for each genotype. That's just impossible. And next to that, we rent space at several growers, also in the main market, where we test our varieties. Basically, that's how we do that. So we are connected to the market itself with our material.
We have a question about space availability. So when we're working in these spaces in breeding for controlled environments, there seems to be just more limitations there. Zeb, I wonder what your experience has been and how you handle and tailor your breeding with that space limitation.
Yeah, so it does make us reliant on our internal trials that we have in the early stage of breeding. So in the early stage, we have a lot of untested varieties that we will just look at one rep and then use BLEPs to kind of normalize the environmental variation that we see in that particular trial. And then that way, when we're moving forward to varieties, when we go to our bigger to the grower, we're a little bit more targeted, and just handling just a handful of varieties that we have already shown in our own environment to be pretty high performing. There's also some level of genetic prediction that we're trying to work with. So just looking at the genetic background of the plants, we can say, eliminate or advance this particular variety, what's based on the previous or the genetic background of the plant, predicted performance. So that's something that we're starting to do a lot more using genome-wide selection, and that's been helping with mitigating the trial resource costs.
So how much do you collaborate across the high-tech or low-tech space or this greenhouse versus glasshouse? Are you sharing germplasm among those programs, or are they pretty, channeled into those specific types?
Yeah, so like I said in the slide, we are historically they have been pretty channeled into specific types. We would see, very narrow gene pools between like a glasshouse high-tech environment. But now with better understanding about the genes that are behaving, plant architecture and fruit producibility over time, we're starting to leverage more germplasm across the whole pepper space, if you will. And so, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to not get into little silos of like, this is a glasshouse yellow pool by pool combination, because if in the future you need, add powdery mildew resistance or something, then trying to bring that in into that very narrow pool can be really challenging. You might get a lot of yield drag. So we've been trying to leverage a lot of genetics and to create diversity in our crosses and avoid narrow pool specific crosses for hybrid.
Robert, is that similar for cucumbers?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we exchange some material between low tech and high tech, but that's mainly based on certain traits that are not available in the other pool. But for example, exchanging parental lines or something, that's quite difficult, because we see, for example, that material from the low tech countries It's just not yielding enough for the high-tech. So there's less direct exchange, but of course we exchange traits or that kind of resistances or that kind of things, that kind of traits.
So Bert, when you're bringing, so I'm guessing you're in a different situation, right? Everything is meant for outdoor and now you're bringing it indoor. What are the traits that you're seeing that are really making or helping you to identify the varieties of strawberries that are performing better in an indoor system?
Well, it's traits that make labor a lot easier. If you look at production outside the open field, it has to be very durable and resilient. Indoor, of course, also, but it's a way different. One of the advantages of going indoors is also that you have a higher number of plants per square meter. So in fact, the yield per square meter is increasing, and also labor is changing. You don't have to go on your knees anymore to pick the fruit. You can do it standing up, which is a huge difference. Also makes it that local people are willing to pick again, and that you don't have to bring in people from far away. For the growers, that's a lot bigger advantage. Yes, and the country. Many things are the same, like taste is, if it's outdoor or indoor, doesn't make any difference. It's also, they both have to be good. It didn't have to be in the past. In the past with strawberry, it had to look like a strawberry, and then it was just the looks which were important, the yield for the grower and the looks for the supermarkets. Nowadays, the supermarkets have discovered that taste is important with strawberry as well. So that's a character that has shifted a lot the last 5 or 10 years, from being not so important to very important right now. And things like, if you're in a greenhouse, you want to be able to pick quickly, and the flowers and the trusses need to come out far enough out of the plant that you can easily pick them. And then they need to have also a sort of kind of spreading in the fruits. You don't want to have all the fruits coming at once. You want to have them just nicely coming one after another. So it's also good for the fruit size, that the fruits are not going very quickly from big or maybe too big to too small, and they are more uniform during that picking time that you have.
Robert, you also mentioned you're breeding for traits like plant architecture that would help reduce labor costs. Could you elaborate a bit more on what those traits really are?
Well, mainly that has to do with the speed of harvesting the fruits. So if you, for example, have a dense crop with large leaves or leaves that are really drooping, that makes the crop not really easy to handle. So the speed of harvesting is in high-tech really important, because the costs are very high. Labor costs are very high. So yeah, if a grower has a variety that requires less labor, yeah, that's more efficient for him in terms of labor. The other thing, for example, is the number of fruits per node that a cucumber plant is giving. There is genetic variation in the number of fruits per node, and what growers usually do is they prune. If a variety gives genetically 2 fruits per node, yeah, then they prune 1 out. Varieties with genetically only 1 fruit per node, yeah, then they just need to prune less. So that's our all traits that are yeah, important for a decision for a grower to choose for a variety or not, next to the yield and the resistances. The yield, in the end, the yield is really important, but we see nowadays that in the package of traits that makes a variety, that the labor part is getting more and more important, because you know, if the labor gets more expensive, yeah, then you know, then you need to find somewhere a different balance.
So compared to some other crops, perhaps some of these vegetable crops, fruit crops have a lot of specifications that need to go into that product. And that can cause challenges both in breeding as well as kind of being able to have germplasm or genetic diversity that can help improve it. Do you have any experience or ideas about how to kind of maintain that balance of keeping that high quality while also being able to make improvements under those highly complex sets of traits? Maybe Zeb, I don't know. Peppers can be very specific in terms of their structure you have to get in that plant.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned before, I think in general, like a breeding scheme for us would be, if we need to incorporate, a novel resistance, for example, or some added diversity into our gene pool, we would probably, make a DevX cross, a cross between our elite line and that particular source that has either that novel trait or some it's something that we're trying to bring in. I mean, I should take a step back and say we just cross to make diversity. I mean, there's no diversity needs to come with the consequence. I mean, we want to have a diversity for a good reason. We don't want to just make a wild cross and just kind of hope that we'll get something interesting. We do try to be directive of what we're making. So when we do have a goal in mind and we make that cross, we would probably make a single back cross on back to the elite line, and then from there we would use genomic prediction based on the breeding values of the genetic background of the breeding line, and try to incorporate that into our breeding pools. So it's not a quick fix when we want to bring in something very novel, but we do recognize that it's important to continue to leverage other genetics from different pools.
Okay, so I know we don't have anyone here that's specifically working on vertical farming or that's their, whole position. But I know Zeb and Bert, you both mentioned having some interest in some kind of experience in that space. Do you feel that those, or do you have an opinion about whether those environments are less variable than glasshouse space, or do you think they'll still have similar challenges based on the wide range of management and environmental considerations?
I definitely. Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's. I think in principle you can expect that in vertical farming there is less variation, less variable than under greenhouse conditions, because light is controlled and also temperature is much more controlled. So that's in that way I would say yes, it's less variable. However, the problem right now, and maybe that's the same with other crops, is that for strawberry at least, it's very unclear in which directions these vertical farmers want to go. With what type of strawberry are they going to work? Is it an everbearer? Is it a Junebearer? Is it a low chill? Is it a high chill? And this is very important for the final choice. What will be the mainstream for this type of cultivation? So we can, for example, start breeding right now in a certain idea. So, for example, it will be everbearers. And then when it turns out to be low chill Junebearers, then we are wrong. So you have to be very careful with your breeding decisions in what direction you want to go before you know exactly what will be the market.
And I was just going to exactly say the same thing. I think that the environment is definitely going to be more controlled, but the technology is always changing, and especially in the vertical farming space, there's a lot of different ways to grow a plant in a vertical space. So if the technology moves faster than the breeding, and if you're spending a year and years over developing a certain plant habit or a plant architecture, and then you find that the technology changed to accommodate a whole different plant architecture, then it's really challenging to meet those ends. So I just repeating what was already said, I think that with good answer.
Sure, it's definitely still a very open question in the agriculture where that vertical farming space is going to go. So related to that, that has a big, again, these questions of lights and resource uses, energy use. Do you consider energy use in any of your breeding goals and decisions? And if so, how?
I could start on that one. Indirectly, yes. So one of our breeding goals is heat and cold tolerance. So in the glass house in Canada during the summer months of June, July, there's plants that are really, really hot, and growers would have to use cooling. And so the fruit production is generally lower. Fruit size and flower drop is a common issue when it gets too hot, and then likewise when it's too cold. Say down in Mexico, they need to apply heating. Even also in Netherlands and Glasshouse, they do also. So trying to prevent a flower drop when those extreme conditions arise is one way that we're trying to address the energy. There's also we're kind of also looking at the plant architecture that would be, would facilitate better cooling for the plants. So maybe something a little bit more open to prevent dead airspace in the canopy, which, a more efficient cooling basically it comes down to. So that's a couple of areas that we're looking at for that.
Yeah, so for cucumbers, there was a question about how, when we go to the supermarket, we see hothouse cucumbers tend to be more expensive. I'd assume that some of that is due to the cost of production, some of it might be due to the cost of importation. What is really driving the higher cost for those varieties, and how does that play into the energy consumption issues?
Yeah, that's maybe a couple of different questions. So is this question related to the first one I read on the
Yeah.
that one? Yeah. Well, as far as I know, I haven't seen in the supermarkets here different pricing for cucumbers from, let's say, the low tech and the high tech. I don't see that in the supermarkets over here. I don't know which markets are meant to in this question, but I don't recognize that too much. And about energy efficiency, we also breed for that indirectly. We see that when the energy crisis started a couple of years ago, that whole discussion came back on, should we breed for varieties that can handle lower temperatures? These days we see that the crisis is, let's say, it's over. So that question is also a little bit to the backside, but you see that growers are trying to lower the costs as much as possible. So not only energy, but also nutrition, for example. So, and we also, so we breed indirectly for that because, our screenings and trials are located also at those growers. So we do breed for that in a way.
Okay. How about disease resistances? So I know most of you mentioned some specific disease resistances that are required in the controlled environments. Are these tending to be different resistances or different pest considerations than open field? And how are you playing into that in the controlled space?
I could give you one example. One, powdery mildew for peppers is generally more of a problem. It's a problem both in open field and protected, but generally it's more of a problem in protected because in open field environment for peppers, it comes in late in the season, and you harvest the crop and you're done. The 1 or 2 time harvest, and so it doesn't really make a difference. But in the protect the environment since it's a long crop duration. Once it's in, you have to maintain those plants, and you don't want to lose plants 6 months in of a 9-month crop. So that it's a resistance that's really important for protected versus open field and peppers.
Yeah, with strawberry, it's also similar, kind of what Zeb said, with mildew. Mildew in protected conditions is more a problem than in the open field. But it's also how are we doing it? It depends a lot on the disease that we are actually focusing on. There are several diseases in strawberry where we are focusing on: mildew, Phytophthora, verticillium, and also recently something that we call black root rot. Some of them we actually try to evaluate in the open field because they are more. That's actually where they are mostly the problem, and you want to tackle them there. Very often you try to do something which is very close to what is in practice. And that is the most ideal situation, you have developed molecular markers for. Like for Phytophthora, we have molecular markers that can help us doing the selection on that part. And of course, we also have still some trials where we validate what we see with the molecular markers, but we mainly do the breeding based on the molecular marker.
Yeah. For cucumber, for high-tech, resistances are getting more and more important. For example, powdery mildew is everywhere a problem. But what we see or we saw is that specifically for high-tech, and then especially the Netherlands, that we still see this linkage between the more resistances, the lower the yield. And that until a couple of years ago, growers still preferred varieties with even just a couple of percentage more high yield over powdery mildew resistance, for example. But that really changed, and that changed because the chemicals get more and more difficult to be able to use, or they work less. So yeah, these days, yeah, you see that in the case of powdery mildew, it's they all want to have now resistance to powdery mildew because it's otherwise too difficult to grow.
Got it. So I want to know, what do you think that open field breeders can learn from what's going on in the controlled environment space? Anyone want to take a stab?
Difficult to say. I mean, you can learn from each other. It depends a lot on the person, and some people feel much more comfortable in open field situations and breeding there, whereas other ones are more happy to work in controlled conditions. Yeah, and I think it's what I personally think is that for me has been very important that when I first started, it was just the open field, in fact, and we gradually incorporated breeding also for greenhouse conditions more and more. And this opened for me what Zeb said in his introduction, that you combine different material with one another. And that has made much more possible. You increase the variability, you increase the possibility to exchange certain characteristics from one gene pool to another gene pool. And then it's the choice of the breeder in what direction you go. And it's you have to make clear for yourself what your goals are. And that's the same whether you are in the open field or in a greenhouse.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more question from the audience. Oh, actually, Zeb just answered it so on the chat. So maybe I'll skip that and go right ahead to wrap up. So Before we wrap it up, I'd love to go around and hear each of your opinions on what is the next big thing, a new technology or a challenge that needs solved in the field of breeding for controlled environment ag. Bert, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I think that are emerging right now and possibilities. There are all kind of in the tools for the breeder, and like auto phenotyping, making more use of a camera and visualization of your breeding plots and certain characteristics in the plant which are easier to see with sensors and cameras than we can do by ourselves. Another thing is we expect the next 10 years also robotization is going to take a big flight, which also mean that we might have to change certain things in the plant habit to get plants which are more adapted to be used by picking robots and those kind of things. And then, of course, things like sequencing and incorporation of CRISPR-Cas, those kind of things that are going to change the next 5 to 10 years to breeding quite a bit.
Yeah, I think for me, definitely the image analysis space is going to be really a game changer. You know, we think about UAVs being used in open field, not so much in protected space right now, just because the logistics of getting an airplane, you know, a drone inside of a greenhouse. But they are making drones now that are propellerless, or at least propellers are protected, so that you could fly drones into even a greenhouse space with a lot of wires and things hanging from the ceiling. So I think that's going to be really key, and it's going to be a lot of work of analyzing those images and making actual data sense to them. I mean, it's easy that anybody can go out and take pictures, but converting them into meaningful data is going to be a real challenge. And then I think also this is probably not just exclusive to protected environment, but you know, it's simple as ChatGPT is really a big change changer for all of us in our day-to-day lives. I mean, we can it doesn't really create brand new things, but it helps us get past some little daily hurdles that we have, and then that can give us more time to think about other innovation ideas. So that whole space of AI and training models to understand what a marketable fruit looks like, and putting value to that, I think is really going to be really important. I mean, the breeding, it's all about the trait, right? It's the traits that we're trying to breed for, and the better we can measure those traits and better understand how those traits transfer into value to the grower, is really going to allow us to be more directive to putting extra money for in the pocket of the grower ultimately, and of course that saves us money as consumers and buying it off the shelf. So yeah.
And I agree with Zeb and with Bert about what they said. Also for cucumber, I think robotization is something that's coming up and also might impact on the varieties that we need to develop. And also the whole lighting developments, the LED lights, different spectra. There are a lot of companies involved in lights and optimizing plant growth with far red or without far red or different spectra. So that can open also a lot of possibilities, and we still need to learn quite a lot on the whole LED on the lighting thing. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all, and thank everyone for coming to this presentation. We really appreciate all your insights and time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.